Some laughs sound harmless until you realize what they lead to. That afternoon, in the heat of a crowded parking lot, a man laughed when he saw a police dog standing calmly beside an officer. To him, the dog looked friendly, ordinary, nothing to worry about. What he didn't know was that, in that very moment, the dog had already noticed something no one else had. And just minutes later, the laughter was gone, replaced by the quiet click of handcuffs closing. The heat still clung to the asphalt behind Desert Ridge Plaza, the kind of late-afternoon heat that made the air shimmer and turned every parked car into a small oven. People moved a little slower, shoulders tight, grocery bags swinging low. A shopping cart rattled across the painted lines and bumped a curb with a hollow clank. Officer Daniel Brooks had seen enough summers in Phoenix to know that trouble didn't always announce itself with sirens. Sometimes it arrived wearing a clean t-shirt and a friendly smile, walking like it had nowhere else to be. He stood near the service entrance, where the back doors of the stores opened onto the lot. A manager in a polo shirt hovered beside him, nervously twisting a set of keys. "They took 3 phones and a couple of those smartwatches," the manager said, voice thin. "It happened fast. My cashier said the guy was polite. Like, too polite." Brooks nodded without rushing him. His eyes swept the lot in a practiced way, not staring at anyone long enough to cause a scene, but noticing everything, who kept looking over their shoulder, who held their arms too stiff, who walked too quickly for the heat. At his left knee sat Buddy. Buddy was a golden retriever with a soft coat the color of warm honey and a face that made strangers want to reach down and scratch his ears. His K9 vest fit snug across his shoulders, the bold lettering catching the sun. He looked, to most people, like a family dog borrowed for a parade. But Brooks knew the difference between a friendly expression and a focused one. Buddy's eyes were calm, his breathing steady. Even with the noise of carts and engines and distant music from a store speaker, the dog's attention stayed anchored to Brooks, waiting. A security guard approached from the shade of a loading dock. He was middle-aged, sweat shining at his temples, and he kept glancing toward the building as if he expected someone to come running out. "Officer," he said quietly, leaning in so the manager wouldn't hear every word. "We had a camera glitch. Not a real glitch, I don't think. One of the rear cameras went dark for maybe 10 seconds, right around the time the theft happened." Brooks kept his face neutral. 10 seconds is all someone needs. The guard nodded. "I rewound it. Looks like somebody walked past too close, like they knew where the lens was. They didn't break it. They just covered it." Brooks glanced at Buddy again, then back to the lot. 10 seconds. Polite thief. Clean. Get away. That usually meant someone who'd done it before, someone who'd learned that the best disguise was normal. A woman in a wide sun hat paused a few feet away, holding a small paper bag to her chest. Her eyes moved from Brooks to Buddy and back again. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Her voice had that careful tone people used when they didn't want to get involved but couldn't help themselves. "We're just checking on something, ma'am," Brooks said. She looked at Buddy, and her expression softened. "He's handsome," she said, then hesitated, as if deciding whether to say more. "I saw a man earlier back by that bench near the dumpsters. He set a backpack down like it was heavy. Then he walked away real quick." "How long ago?" Brooks asked. "Maybe 10 minutes?" She pointed with her chin. "He had dark hair. He looked ordinary. That's why I noticed. He was trying so hard not to be noticed." Brooks thanked her, and she moved on, still, glancing over her shoulder. Brooks turned his attention toward the benches along the edge of the lot, an area half in sun, half in shade, near a row of trash cans and a narrow lane that led out to the street. There was a man there now, leaning against a concrete pillar as if he belonged to it. 30-something, average build, clean sneakers, phone in hand. He didn't look like he was waiting for anyone. He looked like he was killing time. Brooks started walking, not fast, not slow. Buddy rose smoothly and paced beside him, close enough that Brooks could feel the warmth of the dog's shoulder near his leg. People saw them and stepped aside, some with nervous smiles, some with curiosity. A few children tugged at their parents' hands, wanting to get closer. Brooks kept his expression mild, almost relaxed. If someone was watching, he didn't want them to feel hunted too soon. The man by the pillar noticed them. His gaze flicked to the vest, then to Buddy's face. Something sharpened behind his eyes, then quickly smoothed over. He straightened, widening his stance a fraction as if to appear casual. Brooks stopped a comfortable distance away. "Good afternoon," he said, polite, steady. "Mind if I ask you a couple questions?" The man's smile came easy. "Sure," he said. "What's up?" "We've had a report of some stolen merchandise in the area," Brooks said. "We're just talking to folks nearby." The man gave a small laugh, almost friendly. "Stolen? Here?" He glanced around at the cars and families. "That's crazy." Brooks watched his hands, the phone, the pockets, the weight shift from one foot to the other. Nothing dramatic, but nothing entirely loose either. The kind of posture that held itself together. Buddy's head turned slightly, nose working, not in an exaggerated way, but like someone listening to a distant sound. His tail did not wag. He was not stiff, not aggressive. He was simply alert. The man followed Buddy's movement and smirked. "Is that your police dog?" he asked, as if he couldn't believe it. His eyes slid over Buddy's soft face. "No offense, officer, but you've got to be kidding me." He laughed louder this time, an open laugh meant for anyone nearby to hear. A couple walking past glanced over. A teenage boy near a car snorted like he thought it was funny. Brooks didn't flinch. He kept his voice even. "This is K9 Buddy." The man shook his head, still amused. "Buddy," he repeated, like the name was a punchline. "I thought police dogs were, you know?" He lifted his hands, making a vague claw shape. "Scary. German shepherds, those dogs that look like they want to eat you." A breeze pushed dust across the pavement. The heat made the air feel heavy, as if the parking lot itself was holding its breath. Buddy stood quietly at Brooks's side, eyes forward, ears relaxed. If someone didn't know better, they might have thought he didn't understand the insult. But Brooks could see it, the way Buddy's focus narrowed. Not angry, not rattled, just certain. The man's laughter faded into a grin. "So what, he's going to sniff me?" he said. "Go ahead, I'm clean." He said it too quickly, like he'd been waiting to say it. Brooks met his eyes. "What's your name, sir?" "Ethan," the man said. "Ethan Cole." Brooks nodded, as if committing it to memory, then looked down at Buddy. The dog's nose lifted a touch, sampling the air. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm chirped once and stopped. A shopping cart rolled and bumped another cart, ordinary sounds. But beneath them, Brooks felt the moment shift. Not because Ethan had laughed. People laughed all the time when they were nervous, or when they wanted to look in control. The shift came because Buddy's attention had moved, just slightly, away from Ethan's face and toward the benches by the dumpsters, where the shade deepened and a dark backpack sat close, to the leg of a metal bench. Buddy's body didn't pull. He didn't strain at the leash. He simply knew where the story might be hiding. Brooks kept his voice calm. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I'm going to ask you to stay right where you are for a moment." Ethan's grin held, but his eyes tightened. "Why?" he asked, still trying to sound amused. "Because your dog thinks I'm suspicious?" Buddy did not look at Ethan anymore. He looked past him, toward that bench, as if the answer were already waiting there. And for the first time since Brooks stepped into the heat of that parking lot, Ethan stopped laughing. Ethan held his grin like it was a shield, but it didn't land the same way now. His laugh had run out of air, and what was left was a thin smile that kept flickering at the corners. He stood with his weight on one heel, phone still in his hand, trying to look like a man who had nowhere else to be. Officer Brooks didn't crowd him. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stayed in place and kept the leash short, not tight, just controlled. To anyone watching, it looked almost casual, a routine conversation, a friendly dog, nothing to fear. That was the problem. People walked by and slowed down. A woman pushing a stroller stopped near the curb, eyes fixed on Buddy's soft face. A gray-haired man with a ball cap paused with a plastic bag in his hand and muttered, "That dog's adorable," as if the scene were entertainment. Ethan noticed the attention. He took advantage of it the way some people took advantage of an open door. "You see," he said, turning his shoulders slightly toward the onlookers. "He likes me." He lifted his chin and aimed his smile at the small audience. "This is the sweetest police dog I've ever seen." A couple of people gave polite little laughs, the kind meant to keep things light. It wasn't cruel laughter, but it was enough to make Brooks feel the current shifting in the wrong direction. Ethan wanted the moment to feel harmless. He wanted witnesses to remember a calm man being bothered by a cop with a friendly dog. He wanted the story to belong to him. Brooks kept his eyes on Ethan's hands. "Mr. Cole," he said, "have you been inside the stores today?" Ethan rolled his eyes like the question was silly. "Yeah, I grabbed a bottle of water." He held up his phone as if it proved something. "I've got receipts if you want to see them. You guys always do this? Stop people because your dog looks at them funny?" Buddy stood at Brooks' left knee, still and quiet. He wasn't staring at Ethan the way an angry dog would. He was watching the space beyond him, the shaded bench, the dark backpack near its leg, the lane that led out toward the street. Ethan followed Buddy's gaze and scoffed. "What, you want to go sniff trash cans now?" he said. "Go on, Buddy. Be a hero." He said it loud enough for the nearby shoppers to hear, and a teenage boy snorted again. A woman near a sedan shook her head like she felt sorry for the officer. That look, half pity, half impatience, was exactly what Ethan wanted. Brooks didn't take the bait. He'd spent years learning that pride was expensive on the street. He also knew what older people in a crowd usually wanted: calm, control, a sense that the situation wouldn't explode in front of their grandkids. "Sir," Brooks said evenly, "I'm asking you to stay right here. It won't take long." Ethan spread his arms. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm just standing here." He smiled again. "Relax." But his foot slid backward half an inch toward the exit lane. Small, almost nothing. The kind of movement a person made without thinking, unless they were thinking very hard. Brooks's radio crackled faintly, a murmur from dispatch. He didn't answer yet. He let the sound exist, then fade, so Ethan wouldn't get a clear read on what was coming. The store manager and the security guard remained back near the service doors, watching. The manager looked pale, sweaty, as if he blamed himself for what had been stolen. The guard kept scanning the lot, eyes darting to cars that rolled past. Ethan's expression tightened when he noticed them. He'd been hoping the scene would stay between him and Brooks, simple and clean. More eyes meant less control. He lifted his chin again and tried a different angle, softer, almost offended. "Officer," he said, "I don't mean to be disrespectful, but you're making a scene. People are looking." Brooks nodded slightly as if he agreed. "That's why I'm keeping this calm." Ethan's smile flashed again. "Then let me go," he said, and his laugh returned, short and sharp. "Or do you want Buddy to arrest me?" There it was again, the laugh, not the first one. This one was meant to cut. A small group of shoppers had gathered near the curb now, mostly older folks who had time to stop. A woman with silver hair in a neat bun stood with her arms crossed, watching Brooks's face, like she was judging whether the officer could handle himself. Brooks kept his expression steady. He lowered his gaze to Buddy's head and gave a gentle, almost casual scratch behind the dog's ear. It looked like reassurance. It looked like nothing. In truth, it was a check-in, a quiet question without words. Buddy's breathing stayed even. His focus stayed locked. His body language had shifted into something Brooks knew well, an alert calm that wasn't fear and wasn't aggression. It was certainty without noise. Ethan noticed the touch. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if to share a secret. "That dog is a teddy bear," he said. "You know it. I know it. Everyone here knows it." Buddy's ears flicked once. He did not look at Ethan. The woman with the sun hat, the one who had mentioned the backpack earlier, returned at a distance, lingering near the edge of the scene, like she felt responsible now. Her eyes kept sliding to the bench in the shade. Brooks glanced there too, just once, careful. The backpack was still there. Dark, slumped, ordinary. The kind of thing people left behind every day. But in Brooks's experience, the most dangerous things often looked ordinary. He turned back to Ethan. "Where are you headed today?" Brooks asked. Ethan shrugged. "Home." Too quick. "Which direction?" Brooks pressed, still calm. Ethan's jaw worked. "Why does it matter?" "Routine questions," Brooks said. "Same as your name." Ethan made a show of laughing again and looked at the crowd. "Hear that?" he said. "Routine questions. Meanwhile, I'm being treated like a criminal because Lassie here is bored." A few people shifted awkwardly. The silver-haired woman frowned. The man in the ball cap looked down at his bag and then back up, uncertain now. The mood that had been light started to sour. That was another reason Brooks stayed calm. Crowds could turn, and when they did, they often turned fast. Ethan's eyes flicked again toward the exit lane. This time his shoulders followed the glance. He was measuring distance, timing, who was watching him and who wasn't. Buddy's head turned a fraction more toward the bench. His nose lifted, just a touch. He was sampling the air like a professional, not like a pet. A faint breeze rolled through the shade, carrying whatever story that backpack held. Ethan noticed the movement and scoffed. "You really think that dog is doing something," he said, voice dropping, annoyance leaking through. "He's just standing there," Brooks said quietly. "He's working." Ethan stared at him. "Working?" he repeated, mocking the word. Then he smiled again, too wide, too forced. "All right, let him work. Let him sniff me, sniff my shoes, sniff my pockets. I don't care, because you won't find anything." He held his arms out, palms up, the gesture of a man volunteering. But his phone stayed in his right hand. His thumb hovered over the screen as if ready to tap. Brooks noticed. "Put the phone in your pocket for me," he said. Ethan's smile faltered. "Why?" "So I know you're not calling anyone," Brooks said, still polite. "Or deleting anything." Ethan's eyes hardened for a split second. Then he laughed again, louder than necessary. "This is unbelievable," he said. "You're acting like I'm some mastermind." Buddy didn't move. Yet Brooks felt it again, the subtle shift in the air, like the story had reached a hinge. Ethan slipped the phone into his pocket with exaggerated slowness, as if performing compliance. But when his hand came back out, it didn't hang loose. It curled tight for just a moment, then relaxed. Brooks's radio crackled again. This time he answered, voice low and controlled. "Go ahead." The response came faint but clear enough for Brooks's trained ear. A brief update, a timestamp, a reminder of the UPO camera. A note about a second report nearby, earlier in the week. Same type of merchandise, same quick window, same polite approach. Brooks's face didn't change, but inside, the pieces shifted into a straighter line. He looked at Buddy. The dog's attention remained fixed on that shaded bench, the backpack sitting like an innocent object, like it belonged to nobody. Ethan followed Brooks's gaze and took a half step, just slightly, as if to block the view. It wasn't enough for most people to notice. It was enough for Brooks. Ethan's voice grew sharper. "Officer," he said, "am I being detained?" Brooks met his eyes, calm as desert stone. "Right now," he said, "I'm asking you to stay where you are." Ethan's mouth opened, ready to laugh again, to make the crowd his ally. But the laugh didn't come out. Because Buddy had done something small, almost invisible, he leaned forward a fraction, not toward Ethan, but toward the bench. And the older woman in the sun hat, watching from the side, whispered to herself, loud enough for the nearest person to hear, "That dog knows." The crowd quieted. Ethan heard it, and for the first time his confidence looked less like confidence and more like a man trying to hold a door shut with one hand. The quiet didn't last long, but it left a mark. Cars continued to move through the lot, tires whispering over hot pavement. Somewhere a door slammed, metal on metal. Life kept going the way it always did, even when something underneath it had shifted. Officer Brooks felt it clearly now. The scene hadn't grown louder or more aggressive, but it had grown tighter, like a knot being pulled from both ends. Ethan stood where he was, shoulders squared, chin lifted. He wanted to look patient, reasonable. But his eyes kept drifting, not wildly, just enough to give him away. Not to Buddy, not to Brooks, to the bench in the shade. Brooks followed that glance again, this time without pretending not to. The backpack sat slumped against the leg of the bench, its zipper slightly open, one strap twisted under itself. It looked forgotten, abandoned, the kind of thing most people would walk past without a second thought. Buddy didn't walk toward it. He didn't pull or strain. He simply angled his body so that his nose lined up with the breeze drifting out from the shaded corner of the lot. His tail stayed low and still. His ears were relaxed but attentive. Brooks had learned long ago that Buddy didn't rush. When Buddy rushed, it meant danger. When Buddy slowed down like this, it meant certainty. The security guard approached again, careful not to draw attention. He stopped beside Brooks, keeping his voice low. "I checked that bench earlier," the guard murmured. "Didn't think anything of it. People leave bags all the time, but—" He hesitated, eyes flicking toward Ethan. "That guy walked past it twice. Both times he slowed down." Brooks nodded slightly. "Anything else?" The guard swallowed. "The camera that went dark? When it came back on, that backpack was already there." That was enough. Brooks straightened and turned back to Ethan. "Mr. Cole," he said, "do you mind telling me what's in the backpack by the bench?" Ethan blinked. Just once. But it was the kind of blink that came when a question landed too close to home. "What backpack?" he said, too fast. "The one you keep looking at," Brooks replied. A couple of people in the small crowd turned their heads toward the bench. The silver-haired woman followed their gaze and pressed her lips together. The man in the ball cap leaned forward slightly, curiosity replacing his earlier amusement. Ethan laughed again, but this time it didn't sound easy. "You mean that?" he said, pointing vaguely. "I don't know. It's not mine. You think I'd leave stolen stuff just sitting out in the open?" Brooks didn't answer right away. He looked down at Buddy instead. The May-I dog's eyes stayed locked on the shaded area. Not aggressive, not fearful, simply aware. The older woman in the sun hat took a cautious step closer. "Officer," she said, voice trembling just a little, "I'm not trying to cause trouble, but I saw him set that bag down. He looked around first, like he didn't want anyone to notice." Ethan spun toward her. "That's not true," he snapped, the edge in his voice finally showing. "You're mistaken." She stiffened, but didn't back away. "I'm not," she said quietly. I remember his face. The crowd shifted. The mood turned. What had started as a light spectacle now carried weight, responsibility. People began to sense that this wasn't about a friendly dog anymore. Brooks raised one hand slightly, a calming gesture. "Ma'am, thank you," he said. "That's enough." He turned back to Ethan. "I'm going to need you to stay right here," Brooks said, "and I'm going to take a look at that bag." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't have a reason," he said. "You're fishing." Brooks met his eyes. "I have a report of a theft, a camera obstruction, a witness statement, and a K-9 alert." He paused. "That's enough to look." Ethan's breathing changed. Shallow. Quick. He took one step, not toward Brooks, but sideways, positioning himself more directly between Brooks and the bench. Buddy responded instantly, though subtly. He shifted his weight forward, placing his body just a fraction ahead of Brooks's leg. Not a threat, a signal. Brooks felt it through the leash, light as a whisper. "Mr. Cole," Brooks said, firmer now, "do not move." Ethan froze. His eyes flicked to Buddy's face, searching for something, anger, maybe, or confusion. He found neither. Buddy's gaze didn't challenge him. It dismissed him. That was worse. A police cruiser rolled into the far end of the lot, lights off, moving slow. Back up, just in case. The presence alone was enough to draw more attention. Ethan noticed. His shoulders sagged for just a moment, then squared again. He tried one last smile, but it cracked. "You really think that dog knows something?" he said, voice low. "You're putting a lot of faith in a pet." Brooks answered without raising his voice. "He's not a pet." He guided Buddy forward just a few steps. The leash stayed loose. Buddy walked with purpose, nose working, body calm. He stopped at the edge of the shade, inches from the bench, and sat, not next to Ethan, not between people, directly in front of the backpack. The crowd went silent. Even the cars seemed to slow. Buddy didn't look back. He didn't need to. His posture said everything. This was it. This was the place. Ethan took an involuntary step backward. "That's not mine," he said again, louder now, as if volume could change reality. "You can't prove anything." Brooks approached the bench carefully, eyes never leaving Ethan for long. She crouched, gloved hands reaching for the zipper. Ethan's hands curled into fists. The zipper slid open. Inside were boxed electronics, phones, watches, still sealed, price tags intact. Tucked beneath them, a pair of dark gloves, worn thin at the fingertips. The manager gasped from across the lot. Brooks straightened slowly, holding the bag open so the contents were clear. "These match what was taken," he said calmly. Ethan shook his head, backing away another step. "Someone planted that," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "That dog, he's wrong." Buddy didn't move. He didn't need to. The story had caught up, and everyone there could feel it. The air felt thicker once the bag was open. What had been a loose circle of curious onlookers tightened into a quiet half-moon, everyone leaning forward without realizing it. The electronics sat in plain view now, neat and unmistakable. No one laughed any more. Even the teenager who had snorted earlier stared at. The ground. Ethan shook his head again, faster this time, as if motion alone could erase what everyone had seen. "That's not mine," he said, but the words no longer carried the same confidence. They sounded borrowed, rehearsed. "Anybody could have put that there." Officer Brooks zipped the bag halfway closed and stood, keeping his body angled so he could see both Ethan and the crowd. His voice stayed calm, almost gentle, the way it had been from the beginning. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to ask you again to stay where you are." Ethan laughed, sharp and brittle. "You already asked," he said, "and I already told you. This is ridiculous." He took a step, then another, not running, not charging, just moving. It was the kind of movement that pretended to be nothing at all. Buddy rose instantly. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stood, body squared, blocking the path Ethan had chosen. The leash tightened just enough for Brooks to feel the shift. Ethan froze. For a brief second, his eyes locked onto Buddy's. He seemed to expect anger there. Teeth. Something wild. Instead, Buddy looked back at him with the same steady calm he'd had all afternoon. No threat, no fear, just presence. "Easy," Ethan said, holding his hands out again, palms forward. "See? I'm not doing anything." Brooks stepped slightly to the side, recentering himself. "I need you to stay right here," he said. "This isn't over." Ethan swallowed. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. The heat, the eyes, the bag. It was all pressing in now, shrinking his options. The silver-haired woman spoke up again, voice low but firm. "You shouldn't have laughed," she said, almost to herself. "People who laugh like that always think they're smarter than everyone else." Ethan snapped his head toward her. "You don't know me," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. Brooks raised a hand, cutting the exchange short. "Sir," he said, "do you have any identification on you?" Ethan hesitated, just long enough. "Yeah," he said finally. He reached into his back pocket slowly, pulling out a worn wallet. His movements were careful now, measured. Gone was the casual swagger from earlier. He handed the wallet over with a tight smile. "Happy?" Brooks glanced at the ID, then back at Ethan. The name matched what he'd given. The address was local, ordinary. Too ordinary. He handed the wallet back. "Do you mind telling me why you were near the dumpsters when the theft occurred?" Ethan scoffed. "I was making a phone call. You saw me on my phone." "And why set the bag down?" Brooks asked. "I didn't," Ethan said quickly. Too quickly. "You have no proof of that," Brooks nodded. "That's true, but we do have video of you passing the camera when it went dark, and we have a witness who saw you place the bag." "That's not proof," Ethan insisted. His voice rose despite himself. "That's people guessing." The backup cruiser rolled closer now, stopping at the edge of the lot. Two officers stepped out, not rushing, hands relaxed at their sides. Their presence wasn't aggressive, but it was undeniable. Ethan's eyes flicked to them, then back to Brooks. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "You're embarrassing me." Brooks met his gaze. "This isn't about embarrassment," he said. "It's about what's in that bag." Ethan laughed again, but it was hollow now. "So what? You're going to arrest me because your dog sat down?" Buddy shifted his weight, as if responding to his name, though no one had said it. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't need to. Brooks kept his tone even. Buddy didn't just sit down. He alerted. Ethan shook his head. "That's not real. That's just a trick. A guess?" Brooks leaned slightly toward him. "Buddy has been trained to detect specific scents," he said. "He doesn't guess." The crowd murmured softly. A few people nodded. Others whispered to each other, piecing things together. The mood had changed completely now. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was consequence. Ethan backed up another step without realizing it. His heel caught the edge of a parking block, and he stumbled, arms windmilling for balance, before he caught himself. That small loss of control did more damage than anything else. Brooks straightened. "Mr. Cole," he said, firmer now, "I need you to place your hands where I can see them." Ethan stared at him. For a moment, it looked like he might argue again, might laugh, might try to turn the crowd back to his side. Instead, his shoulders slumped. "Come on," he muttered. You really think I'd be stupid enough to steal something and leave it right there? Brooks didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was already sitting quietly beside him, golden fur glowing softly in the late afternoon light. Buddy's eyes stayed focused, calm, certain. Ethan exhaled hard through his nose and lifted his hands slowly, palms open. "This is insane," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. "I didn't do anything." Brooks stepped closer, careful, controlled. "We're going to sort this out," he said. "Right now, I need you to stay still." The other officers moved in, positioning themselves without crowding. The backup cruiser idled, engine humming low. The parking lot felt smaller than it had minutes ago. Ethan stood in the center of it, hands raised, confidence drained away, staring at a dog he'd laughed at not long before. And for the first time, he looked like a man realizing that the joke had never been on the police at all. For a moment, nobody moved. It was strange how quickly a busy parking lot could turn into a quiet room. The traffic sounds still existed, the distant whoosh of a car passing on the main road, a muffled engine turning over, the faint rattle of a cart. But they felt far away now, as if the heat had wrapped the entire scene in glass. Ethan stood with his hands raised, palms open. His face had gone shiny with sweat, and his mouth kept opening like he wanted to speak, then closing again when he realized there was nothing left that sounded convincing. Officer Brooks stayed close, but not rushed. He'd learned that the few seconds after someone realizes they're cornered could be the most dangerous. Some people fought. Some people ran. Some people did something worse out of panic. Buddy stood at Brooks' side, posture steady. Not tense, not excited, simply anchored. The older woman in the sun hat watched with her hands clasped near her chest. The silver-haired woman kept her arms crossed, chin lifted, eyes narrowed, as if she refused to look away until the truth finished unfolding. The man in the ball cap shifted his weight, the plastic bag crinkling softly in his grip. One of the backup officers, young, short hair, calm face, took a step, closer to Brooks. He didn't speak out loud. He didn't need to. Brooks saw the question in his eyes. "What do you want me to do?" Brooks gave a slight nod toward the open backpack and then toward Ethan. A silent plan. Keep it controlled. Keep it clean. Ethan cleared his throat. "Look," he said, trying to recover his earlier tone, "this has gotten way out of proportion. I'm a customer. That bag isn't mine. I don't even know what's in it." His voice rose at the end, like he wanted the crowd to hear the innocence he was claiming. "You can't just decide it's mine because your dog sat down." The younger officer glanced toward Buddy, then back to Ethan with a tight, unreadable expression. Brooks held Ethan's gaze instead. "Sir," Brooks said, "no one is deciding anything. We're following evidence." Ethan laughed, one short burst, forced. "Evidence?" he repeated. "A bag in a public parking lot is evidence now?" Brooks didn't react. He simply waited for the laugh to die on its own. It did. The manager from the store had moved closer now, hovering near the edge of the circle, eyes wide. He looked like a man watching his own life spin out of control over a few stolen boxes. His lips trembled as he spoke. "Those are ours," he said, voice thin. "Those are from our display case." Ethan turned his head sharply. "You don't know that," he snapped. The manager flinched and took half a step back. Brooks stepped in, his voice still steady but firmer. "Enough," he said. "Mr. Cole, keep your hands up." Ethan's chest rose and fell. His eyes darted again, more openly now, scanning for a path that didn't exist. The exit lane, the spaces between cars, the gap between the small crowd and the shade. Buddy's head followed none of it. Buddy remained focused, calm, as if the world had narrowed down to a simple truth and everything else was noise. The younger officer walked toward the backpack, slow and cautious, and crouched beside it. He didn't reach in right away. He looked at Brooks first, waiting for the signal. Brooks nodded once. The officer pulled the bag fully open and began lifting items carefully, one at a time. Boxes with bright logos, sealed packaging, a handful of smaller accessories in clear plastic. Each piece came out like another nail driven into Ethan's story. Ethan's face drained of color. "That's not," he began, then stopped. His eyes had locked on something inside the bag, something Brooks couldn't see from where he stood. Brooks noticed the change. "What is it?" he asked quietly, not to Ethan, but to the officer at the bag. The officer paused, then lifted a thin black pouch, unmarked, soft-sided, the kind that didn't belong with retail packaging. He unzipped it. Inside were several blank gift cards and a small device that looked like a card reader. Not the kind a store clerk used, the kind used to steal. The crowd made a low sound, a EOST shared inhale. Ethan's hands trembled. Brooks felt the moment harden. This wasn't just petty theft. This suggested planning, a pattern, maybe a bigger case than the manager realized. Ethan spoke quickly, words tumbling out. "I don't know what that is," he said. "That's not mine. Somebody's trying to frame me. You can't prove I touched that." Brooks watched his face, his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flicking down and to the right. A common tell, a place people looked when they were thinking about the next move, not the truth. Brooks kept his voice low. "You said you bought water," he said. "Which store?" Ethan blinked. "The one up front," he said. "What's it called?" Brooks asked. Ethan hesitated. "Just a beat too long." His mouth worked. "I don't remember." Brooks nodded once. "And you've been standing back here in the heat for 10 minutes because—" Ethan's breath hitched. "I was waiting for a friend." "What's your friend's name?" Brooks asked. Ethan's eyes snapped up, anger flashing. "Are you serious?" he said. "This is harassment." Brooks didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Hands up," he repeated. "Stay still." The younger officer stood, holding the black pouch carefully. "Dan," he said to Brooks quietly, "this is more than the store stuff." Brooks nodded, and then something changed in Ethan. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sudden sprint. It was the smallest shift of weight, the kind that could be explained away if you weren't watching. His right foot slid, toe angling toward the narrow lane behind the dumpsters. His shoulders turned just slightly, like a man preparing to slip away in the space between breaths. Buddy reacted before Brooks did, not with teeth, not with a bark, with motion. Buddy stepped forward, one smooth, controlled step, placing himself directly in Ethan's path. His body blocked the lane without aggression, without lunging. His head lifted, eyes steady, as if to say, "No." Ethan froze again, and his face twisted with disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered, the words barely audible. It wasn't fear he showed now. It was insult. The kind of insult that comes when a person realizes they've been outsmarted by something they refuse to respect. Brooks's voice stayed calm, but the air around it sharpened. "Mr. Cole," he said, "do not move." Ethan swallowed hard. His hands were still raised, but his fingers curled, his jaw clenched. His eyes flicked to the crowd, dozens of witnesses now, a silent wall of strangers who had stopped seeing him as a joke and started seeing him as a man caught. The heat pressed down. The seconds stretched. No one spoke. Buddy stood perfectly still, a golden statue in a black vest, breathing slow, blocking the only clean exit. And in that silence, long enough for a heartbeat to feel like a minute, Ethan finally understood something he should have known from the start. This dog didn't need to bite. This dog only needed to be right. The silence held. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from fear or shock. It was heavier than that, settled, deliberate, like the moment before a verdict is read. Even the heat seemed to pause, pressing down without moving. Buddy stood squarely in front of Ethan, body angled just enough to block the narrow lane behind the dumpsters. His stance was balanced, confident, unyielding. He did not bare his teeth. He did not bark. He simply occupied the space Ethan needed most. Ethan stared at him, chest rising and falling too fast. "This is unbelievable," he said, his voice low and tight. "You can't let a dog decide this?" Officer Brooks stepped forward, closing the distance by a single pace. "Buddy isn't deciding anything," he said. "He's showing us what he knows." Ethan let out a shaky breath and laughed once, short and bitter. "What he knows," he repeated. "He's a dog," Buddy didn't move. The younger officer shifted to Brooks's side, the black pouch still in his hand. "We ran the serials on the packaging," he said quietly. "Matches the store's inventory. And this device, same model used in 2 other thefts last month. Same area." Brooks nodded, absorbing it. The picture was no longer just clear. It was complete. Ethan heard enough to understand. His shoulders slumped, then stiffened again as he tried to straighten himself. "That still doesn't prove anything," he said. "You don't have me on camera taking it. You don't have fingerprints." Brooks met his eyes. "We will," he said, "and we'll have more questions." Ethan swallowed. His gaze flicked once more to the exit lane, then to the crowd. There were too many people now. Too many phones raised just enough to record without being obvious. Too many witnesses whose faces had shifted from curiosity to judgment. The silver-haired woman shook her head slowly. "He laughed," she murmured to no one in particular, "like he thought none of this mattered." Ethan snapped his head toward her, anger flashing. "Mind your business," he said. Brooks's voice cut in, calm but firm. "That's enough." Ethan closed his mouth. His hands were still raised, but the strength had gone out of his arms. His wrists sagged slightly, fingers stiff, like holding them up had become an effort. Brooks took another step closer. He could smell the sweat now, sharp and anxious. He could see the small tremor in Ethan's hands, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched. "Mr. Cole," Brooks said, "turn around and place your hands behind your back." Ethan stared at him. For a long second, it looked like he might argue again, might reach for another laugh, another excuse. But the moment passed. Slowly, he turned. Buddy shifted with him, mirroring the movement just enough to stay between Ethan and any thought of escape. His leash stayed loose. Brooks barely had to guide him. As Ethan brought his hands behind him, he muttered, "All this? Because of a bag." Brooks leaned in just enough to be heard. "Because of a pattern," he said, "and because you thought no one was paying attention." The cuffs came out, metal catching the sun. There was no struggle, no dramatic movement, just the soft click of steel closing around Ethan's wrists. The sound carried, a ripple moved through the crowd, not cheers, not gasps, just a shared release. A sense that something had ended the way it should. Ethan stood there, shoulders rounded now, staring at the ground. The confidence he'd worn so easily earlier lay in pieces at his feet. Buddy stepped back as Brooks secured the cuffs, returning to his handler's side. His posture relaxed almost immediately. The work was done. Ethan looked at him then, really looked. The soft fur, the calm eyes, the dog that had never raised his voice. "You didn't even touch me," Ethan said quietly, disbelief creeping into his tone. Buddy's tail gave a single, slow wag. Brooks guided Ethan toward the waiting cruiser. As they passed the bench, the backpack sat open and empty now, its contents laid out on the hood of a patrol car like a lesson. The store manager let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," he said to no one and everyone. The woman in the sun hat pressed a hand to her mouth. "I knew it," she whispered. That dog knew. Brooks paused at the cruiser door. He glanced down at Buddy and reached out, resting his hand briefly on the dog's head. Not praise, not celebration, just acknowledgement. Buddy leaned into the touch for half a second, then straightened again, alert but calm. As Ethan was placed in the back seat, he looked out through the open door at the crowd that had formed around him. His eyes landed on Buddy one last time. He shook his head slowly. "I laughed at you," he said, almost to himself. Buddy didn't react. The cruiser door closed with a solid thud, and just like that, the parking lot began to breathe again. The cruiser sat idling at the edge of the lot, its engine humming low, patient. The afternoon sun dipped just enough to soften the glare, casting longer shadows across the asphalt. What had felt like a public spectacle minutes earlier was settling into something quieter now, order returning one small piece at a time. Ethan sat in the back seat, hands cuffed, staring straight ahead. The laughter that had once come so easily to him felt like it belonged to another person. When he shifted, the metal at his wrists clicked softly, a sound that seemed louder now that everything else had gone still. Officer Brooks stood near the hood of his vehicle, finishing a brief exchange with the backup officers. Names were written down, times were confirmed. The electronics were photographed and logged. Everything moved the way it was supposed to move, steady and methodical, without drama. A few people lingered at the edge of the lot, reluctant to leave, as if they needed to see the ending with their own eyes before they could go back to their errands. The silver-haired woman adjusted her purse strap and shook her head slowly. "He laughed," she said to the man beside her, voice low, "like it was all a game." The man nodded. "Didn't look like much of a game in the end." The store manager approached Brooks, hands clasped tightly in front of him. His face was pale, but there was relief there too. The kind that came after a long-held breath was finally released. "I really appreciate this," he said. "We've had a few losses lately. Makes you feel helpless." Brooks nodded. "You did the right thing by calling it in." The manager glanced at Buddy, who stood quietly at Brooks's side, posture relaxed now that the tension had drained away. "Hard to believe," the manager said, almost smiling. "He doesn't look like the kind of dog you'd be afraid of." Brooks followed his gaze. Buddy's mouth was slightly open, tongue just visible, eyes calm. He looked exactly like what he was, a good dog, comfortable in his skin. "That's why people underestimate him," Brooks said. Nearby, the woman in the sun hat stepped closer, hesitant. "Officer," she said, "I just wanted to say, I'm glad I spoke up. I almost didn't." Brooks met her eyes. "It mattered," he said simply. She nodded, swallowing, then looked at Buddy again. "He never even barked," she said, wonder in her voice. "No," Brooks said. "He didn't need to." Across the lot, Ethan shifted again in the back of the cruiser. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see Buddy through the window. The dog stood with his handler, calm and unremarkable, like he belonged there, which of course he did. Ethan let out a slow breath. "I thought you were just a prop," he muttered, the words barely audible through the glass. A show. Buddy didn't hear him, or if he did, he gave no sign. The backup officers finished their checks and returned to their cruiser. One of them clapped Brooks lightly on the shoulder. "Good work," he said. "Clean stop." Brooks nodded. "Thanks." As the second cruiser pulled away, people began to drift off, the spell broken. Carts rolled again. Doors opened and closed. Conversations returned to groceries and dinner plans and the small details of ordinary life. The parking lot looked the same as it had an hour earlier, but for those who had stayed to watch, it felt different, like they'd witnessed something quiet, but important. Brooks opened the rear door of his cruiser and leaned in briefly. "You're being charged with possession of stolen property," he said evenly. "And we'll be following up on the equipment found in the bag." Ethan stared at the floor. "All because I laughed," he said, not quite accusing, not quite joking. Brooks closed the door gently. "Because you underestimated," he replied. He stepped back and gave Buddy a small nod. The dog responded by sitting neatly at his side, waiting as he always did. The cruiser pulled away slowly, tires whispering against the pavement. Ethan's face disappeared behind tinted glass, and with it, the last trace of the smug confidence that had started the afternoon. Brooks stood for a moment longer, watching until the vehicle turned the corner and was gone. Then he exhaled, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. Buddy looked up at him, eyes bright but calm, as if asking what came next. Brooks smiled faintly and reached down, resting his hand on Buddy's head. "Let's go home," he said. The sun dipped lower, painting the lot in warm light as they walked away together, the laughter from earlier already fading into memory, replaced by the steady, quiet satisfaction of a job done right. By the time the sun slipped behind the low buildings along the edge of the plaza, the parking lot had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Engines started. Doors closed. A breeze carried the smell of warm asphalt and distant food from a nearby restaurant. To anyone arriving late, it would have looked like nothing unusual had happened. Officer Daniel Brooks guided his cruiser into a quieter street and drove without hurry. The city softened as evening settled in, traffic thinning, the sharp edges of the day giving way to longer shadows and calmer thoughts. Buddy rode in the back, secured in his harness, head resting lightly against the side. His eyes followed the movement of passing lights, relaxed now, the way they always were once the work was done. There was no tension left in him, no echo of the confrontation, just quiet presence. At a red light, Brooks glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You did good today," Brooks said, not loud, not formal, just the truth. Buddy lifted his head slightly, ears flicking once, then settled again. Praise was not something he chased. It was simply part of the rhythm, work, then rest. The cruiser rolled on, and Brooks found his thoughts drifting back to the beginning of the afternoon. The laugh, the way it had cut through the heat and landed wrong the moment he heard it. He'd seen that kind of laugh before. The laugh of someone who believed the world worked only for people like him. Someone who thought confidence was the same as control. Ethan Cole had laughed because he saw a friendly face and decided that meant weakness. He had laughed because Buddy didn't snarl or bare his teeth. He had laughed because the truth doesn't always announce itself in a way people recognize. Most people expected danger to look dangerous. They didn't expect it to look calm. Brooks turned into the station lot and parked. The building hummed quietly, a familiar place that smelled faintly of coffee and old paperwork. He stepped out and opened the rear door, unclipping Buddy's harness. Buddy hopped down and shook once, as if shedding the last weight of the day. His tail wagged lazily as he followed Brooks inside. A couple of officers nodded as they passed. One of them smiled. "Heard about the stop," he said. "Clean work." Brooks nodded in return. "All him," he replied, glancing down at Buddy. Later, after the reports were filed and the lights in the office dimmed, Brooks and Buddy stepped back outside. The air had cooled just enough to be comfortable. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. Brooks crouched and rested his forearms on his knees, looking Buddy in the eyes. "You know," he said quietly, "most people think they'd spot trouble right away. They think it has a look, a sound." Buddy's gaze stayed steady, unblinking. "But you knew," Brooks continued. "You knew before anyone else said a word." Buddy tilted his head slightly, as if listening, though Brooks knew he didn't need the explanation. Back at the plaza, people would remember the ending. The cuffs, the cruiser pulling away, the way the laughter stopped. But Buddy had known long before that, long before the crowd gathered, before the bag was opened, before the truth was visible to everyone. He had known when the air shifted, when the confidence rang hollow, when the laugh didn't match the man. Brooks stood and clipped the leash back on. "Let's go," he said. As they walked toward the exit, Buddy's tail swayed gently, his steps easy and unhurried. To anyone watching, he was just a golden retriever heading home after a long day. The kind of dog people trusted with children, the kind people underestimated. That was fine, because Buddy didn't need fear to do his job. He didn't need teeth or noise or spectacle. He only needed to pay attention, and in a world full of people who laughed too quickly and listened too little, that quiet certainty was more powerful than anyone realized. The laughter from earlier was gone now, swallowed by the evening. What remained was the truth, and the calm presence of the one who had seen it coming all along. Before you go, I'd like to hear from you. If you believe this dog did exactly what he was trained to do, type 1 in the comments. If you think people often underestimate quiet strength, type 00. There's no right or wrong answer, just your honest feeling. And if this story stayed with you, consider subscribing to the channel. Every week we share real feeling stories about loyalty, patience, and the moments when truth reveals itself quietly, but clearly. Your support helps these stories continue, and your comment helps others find them too. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.